This is Books of Titans, the podcast dedicated to the influences of influencers. The books that have helped shape prominent inventors, business leaders, athletes, intellectuals, scientists, and others. We'll talk about what makes these books such classics, and at least attempt to have an intelligent discussion about what makes them so important and influential. Today we're going to cover the book Maxims and Reflections by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. As for who recommended the book, I'll hand that off to you, Eric.
And that's going to be Ed Cooke, and I'm going to read the intro from Tools of Titans for Ed. This is quite interesting. So Ed Cooke, who can be found at Ted Cooke, and Cooke is with an E, and memrise.com, MEMRISE.com. He's the CEO of Memrise and a certified Grand Master of Memory. This means he's able to memorize and recite a 1,000-digit number within an hour.
Wow.
Still wrapping my head around that. B, a shuffled pack of cards within a few minutes. And C, 10 packs of shuffled cards within an hour. Perhaps more impressive, he can quickly train others to do the same. In 2010, he was interviewed by a journalist named Joshua Foer. Under Ed's Yoda-like tutelage, in 2011, Joshua became the very next American memory champion. It took less than a year for Ed to transform a novice into a world class. The result was Foer's book, Moonwalking with Einstein, which sounds like an interesting book. I may add that one to the 2019 list.
Yeah, interesting.
And about the author, I'm going to turn that back to you.
Yeah, so Goethe is one of the truly great Renaissance men to ever live. Definitely has written perhaps the greatest German novel ever written. Many believe that his Faust is one of the greatest novels period ever written. But, you know, this is a guy who, he was a celebrity writer in Germany by the age of 25 and went on to become something of a natural philosopher and scientist, wrote some major scientific work, did some of the best German poetry in history, wrote more novels, lots of plays, became a diplomat and a civil servant, you know, just your standard life. Left behind treatises on botany, anatomy, picked major fights with Isaac Newton on color theory. We can put a link in the show notes about some of that. There's actually some interesting stuff. Newton has generally won the day on this, but Goethe had some experimental data that he argued went the other way, and you can see some of his in this book, some of his antipathy towards Newton's theory of color. But anyway, wrote 4 novels, left behind all sorts of other fragments, 10,000 letters, about 3,000 drawings. I mean, this guy, he was tireless and lived. He died 82 years old. And filled those 82 years with a tremendous amount of productive literary output and all sorts of contributions to his world. So someone who is a shaper of the world that we live in many respects. One of the first men, or one of the truly great men of the modern era, or as the era turned into the modern era. One of those truly great men. So. Definitely always excited to read stuff by Goethe.
I would love to find out, or I don't know if it exists, but to find out what this guy's daily rituals were.
His daily routines to be that productive.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to do all that without, I suppose it actually was an advantage that he didn't have the internet or lots of digital tools to get more work done, because he could just sit down and write. But fewer distractions than we have now. But man, yeah,
not bad. And we have one of his books on our list this year, so that should be fun to read that as well.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to. I'm familiar with Faust from other stuff, but I'm ashamed to say that I've never actually read the whole thing. I've never read it in full. Anything more than just little snippets or anything like that, abridgments of things. So I wanna dive into Faust this year. I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, be a good one. So we'll jump into our overview and initial reactions. And I'll just start by saying that the structure of this book is that it is it's a short book of sayings, so there's no storyline or an arc. You just kind of pick it up and read some pearls of wisdom, and some were pretty straightforward, and others required you to chew on them a little bit. But that's the structure. It's a very short book. I have a printed copy in front of me here that contains 54 pages. So most of the sayings are between 2 and 5 lines. And so you can get through it pretty quickly. You can go at your own pace. If you really want to chew on these, you can take your time with it. But probably a good one to just kind of have laying around and pick it up every now and then and read some of the quotes. So I think most of what we're going to be discussing today is just going through some of our favorite quotes, since there is no storyline or anything like that. But other than that, what any initial reactions or?
I mean, it is wisdom literature effectively. I mean, my main thing is that this is one of the brightest minds of his century, and one of the brightest minds of the post-Enlightenment period. So worth listening to what he found compelling and profound. So I found it. It's worth, like you said, poking around in and familiarizing yourself with. This is one of those things, I fall in the line of, I like what C.S. Lewis has to say, that it's a good thing to repeatedly expose yourself to the wisdom of other ages and other eras, which actually there's some stuff that Goethe says about that in this book as well. But that it's important to do that, because that's the only way that you can kind of shed light on your own ages, on the biases and blind spots of your own epoch, that if you only read the modern stuff and expose yourself to news and modern books, you're gonna wind up falling into common mistakes and trends that are unique to your own era, and whereas reading some of the past stuff actually can help remind you of, that the way that we think about this isn't the way it's always been, and actually there's a point there. So I found that also useful too. So definitely something that's worth keeping around and taking a look at once in a while.
Yeah. And in light of your comment about reading the news, I'm going to start with my first quote, which is exactly about that, where he says, "If one has not read the newspapers for some months and then reads them all together, one sees, as one never saw before, how much time is wasted with this kind of literature."
Yeah.
So I'm kind of half and half on that. I've spent the last year not reading news, but I used to love it, getting the paper and just sitting down with it. So, but yeah, I guess a lot of it is past due.
Well, it reminds
doesn't really
me
apply anymore after a day or so.
It reminds me of what Thoreau said, that you can read the news and then just change the names and the news is the same in a week. Mm-hmm. So there's some overlap with what Thoreau said in Walden about the same thing. He's like, people waste all their time reading all this news when in fact, just change the names of which country is attacking which country and which politician is upset with which politician, and change the name of whatever issue they're discussing, and you basically have the news, and that's that. And actually, there's something to that in terms of the current coverage of the American political situation right now, where so much of the coverage boils down to such and such political leader tweeted this. Can you believe it? And Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that our politicians say in the United States is pretty dumb. But, honestly, focusing on a person's Twitter account really isn't affecting people's ordinary daily lives in matters of policy all that much. So it's amazing to see how much ink is spilled and how many people get all upset about those things, and that runs the media cycle. And actually, that reminds me, I was listening to a podcast today, and there was a quote by Tim Ferriss actually about some of the dangers of this this news stuff that I actually I wrote down because I appreciated it. And he said, if you look at a lot of the noise and craziness right now in the media cycle, there are many people who are training themselves and encouraging other people to make everyone in the world change their behavior, to make everyone other than themselves less offensive. This is the opposite of making yourself resilient. It's much more practical and possible to train yourself to be less easily offended, to train yourself to reframe so that you can take people, many of which are never going to change their behaviors, and repurpose what they might present you with as an opportunity or a gift. If your default is always fighting, not a good approach. And, that I think is to some degree what Goethe is getting at as well in that nice little quote.
Yeah. You should we just switch off? You want to?
Yeah, I can do another one.
All right.
Or do my first one. Fools and intelligent people are equally undamaging. Half fools and half sages, these are the most dangerous of all.
Yep. All right, my next one. Against criticism, a man can neither protest nor defend himself. He must act in spite of it, and then criticism will gradually yield to him.
That's a brilliant quote. That's a brilliant quote.
Yeah.
Because if you do defend yourself, well, then, you must have something to defend. And then if you don't, well, then there's also problems with that. But if you just go plugging away, well, eventually it has to subject itself to you. So it's pretty brilliant. The greatest, so my next one, the greatest people are always linked with their century, through some weakness. This getting back to the weaknesses of your own era, your own age.
Everything of an abstract or symbolic nature, as soon as it is challenged by realities, ends by consuming them and itself. So credit consumes both money and itself. I liked this one. One of our books this year for the 2017 Books of Titans list was debt. And this quote made me think of that. I actually wrote this in the front of that book. Everything of an abstract or symbolic nature, whether credit, money, as soon as it is challenged by realities, ends by consuming them and itself. So credit consumes both money and itself. That was pretty interesting one.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next one. For me, anyone who doesn't know foreign languages knows nothing of his own. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Everything that frees our spirit without giving us control of ourselves is ruinous.
Ruinous?
Ruinous.
Yeah. That, and there is a strong emphasis on self-control throughout this book. The importance of governing yourself and so on. Actually, one of the next ones that I was going to read off here is connected to that. You ask, which form of government is the best? Whichever teaches us to govern ourselves. That's yeah. That's pretty brilliant.
This one I think kind of ties in with the first one you read. No one is more a slave than he who thinks himself free without being so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the half fool to some degree.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Next one. The happiest man is one who can link the end of his life with its beginning. And you could spend days meditating on that one. At least I could.
Yeah.
This whole idea of what it means to link the end of your life with its beginning and all this. I mean, my immediate thing is something we talked about on this podcast before, about this idea of living in a specific narrative that gives you purpose and how important that is. And having this coherent sense that drives you so that you can actually connect. This is where I've come from, and this is where I'm going. And ultimately, when I come to the end of my life, I'll have gotten there. You know, I have a distinct purpose, and I think there's something to that. But I think he's getting even beyond that, which is, you know, again, you could spend a lot of time on that one. The happiest man is one who can link the end of his life with its beginning. And I was also reminded of Solon's famous, you know, the famous report of Herodotus of when Croesus was asking who the happiest or the most fortunate man, the most fortunate person in the world was, and he says, "Oh, you know, this guy who died recently." I would say him. Croesus is expecting him to say you, Croesus, because you're the wealthiest guy out there. And he's like, "What are you talking about? This dead guy?" And he's like, "Well, you know, he and his sons died in a really noble fashion after living noble lives. So, you know, you can't really say anything negative. Like they really finished well."
Yeah. A big theme in Deep Survival as well, that book
that
we read.
Yeah.
Mine is nothing is more highly to be prized than the value of each day. And again, this theme comes back. We've seen it in a lot of books, from The Old Man and the Sea to plenty of the others that we've read, of just taking a day at a time and focusing on that, and not necessarily some distant future date when things are going to be better or you're going to be more together, but really taking the value of each day and living it well.
Yeah. I mean, and again, a lot of these wise themes show up all over the place in numerous books, but you know, tons of these throughout, you know, these gems throughout this. And again, we're limiting to a very few favorite quotes. I mean, I could have probably listed 100 of these that I, you know, I really appreciated. And, you know, again, you can this is actually, it would be an interesting book to meditate with a little bit. To, you know, sit down in the morning or in the evening or whatever and just pull out a page and read through it and find one of these and just kind of reflect on it for 5 or 10 minutes. Just sit there quietly and think through the statement. I think there could be some use to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my next one, and there's some sense of humor here. A mistaken idea is all very well as long as you are young, but it's no good dragging it on into old age.
Kind of like what you were talking about a few episodes ago, I think, with you would hope that if you have the wrong idea, you have put it away by the time. That could be the worst thing, is keeping hold of an idea just out of pride or something else.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, I'd like to know.
Yeah.
That way I can at least fix it. I mean, why would I want to hold on to something just because I want to be, you know, I want to pretend to be right for so long? I'd rather just go ahead and figure out that I'm wrong and switch sides.
When nature begins to reveal her open secret to a man, he feels an irresistible longing for her worthiest interpreter, art.
He's got a lot to say about art, and it's interesting how much he parallels, or how much he puts art in the context of nature and beauty and this mysterious longing that art calls out, and that a person who really truly begins to understand nature is going to have that artistic impulse, which I think a lot of times these days we don't see. I mean, it's interesting. We don't see the same, scientists these days are not people who usually are not people who also wind up being high-level artists or whatever else. That impulse doesn't seem to map on as much, and I wonder whether or not that's to some degree because of how fragmented and siloed our scientific knowledge has become, to where you're so often looking at such a small portion of knowledge in a given field that you don't get the chance to see the sublime aspect of things put together.
Yeah.
Then you do get, your Feynmans, your Richard Feynmans and others who, Feynman became an avid drawer of the nude female form, for example. I mean, there is some recourse to art for him. So, and, that connects with my next one here. Beauty is a manifestation of secret natural laws which without this appearance would have remained eternally hidden from us.
Wow.
It's a really interesting quote.
Yeah.
This idea that beauty is actually a way of revealing stuff that we never would have seen or noticed. Some truths about the way the world works and about all sorts of other things, just truths, that beauty actually is a means to truth. That's a fascinating concept. And I don't think he's wrong.
Yeah. And
that also is interesting too, in that, there's the scientific and mathematical preference for elegance. And, some theorists have suggested that we often are limited in our theoretical underpinnings because we have an impulse toward elegance. A more elegant theory is preferred. But I think there's something to that, because there is that aspect of the beautiful, the elegant, that actually does. I do think intuitively that there's something to that in terms of that mapping onto truth.
Well, and it speaks to that irresistible longing of my last quote.
Yep.
My next quote's rather short. Architecture is a speechless music.
That's really.
That was pretty.
It's. He has a way of combining elements that's really fresh.
Yeah.
Combining different parts of thought and all that. That's really fresh. That's another good example. My next one. Ingratitude is always a kind of weakness. I have never known competent people to be ungrateful. Huh.
Yeah, good one.
I have never known competent people to be ungrateful. Huh. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd almost think it's the opposite.
Yeah, but actually, I mean, in reflecting on that, I mean, is that not your experience as well? That the most competent, the most successful, and I mean successful in terms of being able to, the most capable, let's put it that way. Again, competent. That those people tend to be the people who are most grateful anytime you do something. That is actually true. It seems to be in my experience.
Yeah.
It connects with me a little bit.
Yeah. All right, I've got one more. There is nothing more odious than the majority. It consists of a few powerful men to lead the way, of accommodating rascals and submissive weaklings, and of a mass of men who trot after them without in the least knowing their own mind.
Okay, I got a few more here. First one is bonus vir semper tiro. Bonus vir semper tiro. So that's a very good one. One of the better ones in this book.
So semper is always, isn't it?
Yeah. This is Latin, of course. Bonus is good. Vir is the word for man. That's where you get virtue. So a good man is always a beginner. Bonus vir semper tiro. Bonus vir semper tyro. So a good man is always a beginner. And that gets back to something we've talked about how many times on this podcast now? That theme keeps coming up.
Being an amateur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then there are people who never make mistakes because they never have sensible projects. And sensible here actually is the old meaning of that, meaning that the project isn't falsifiable, isn't available to the senses, right? So these are people who, you can't make them. They've put themselves in positions where they can't make a mistake. They can't be said to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. He looks down upon that. All right. Scholarly knowledge is greatly retarded by our preoccupation with what is not worth knowing and with what is unknowable. Scholarly knowledge is greatly retarded by our occupation or by our preoccupation with what is not worth knowing and with what is unknowable. And I will say, just as an aside, in my field at least, the Germans are on the forefront of this. You get all sorts of, some of the source criticism in particular, where it's, you've got in some areas of literature, you have, this ancient text, and instead of studying the ancient text, proper as a thing in itself, instead you have these scholars who are reconstructing the hypothetical source underlying the hypothetical source that underlies the hypothetical source for the text as we have it. So like 3 levels down what that hypothetical Grundschrift, original writing, must have been. Now, you may be able to tell by my disgust for this that I tend to be kind of cynical and skeptical of our capacity to actually reconstruct such things. And I regard that both not worth knowing and unknowable. So, yeah. And really, maybe my favorite quote from the entire book is this: "The first and last thing demanded of genius is love of truth." The first and last thing demanded of genius is love of truth. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
If you don't have that love of truth, your genius gets polluted. And there's a number of other quotes through here where he talks about that if you're not focused and fixated on the truth, on pursuing that aspect of things, then, well, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're going to wind up in trouble.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our favorite quotes. And again, we could have gone on for another hour on this, but it's really not worth it. You just need to pick up the book and read that. But we still have our other segment that Eric likes to bring in periodically, and that is Eric's favorite word from the book.
Ding, ding, ding. All right, do you know how to pronounce this one?
Yes, I do.
All right.
So normally this would be said autochthonous.
Autochthonous. I liked it. I'd never seen it before. And it means indigenous rather than descended from migrants or colonists.
Yeah, so it comes from 2 Greek words. So it's auto, as in, auto, right? So you get, it has to do with of itself, right? So, and then kthonos, which is of a land, basically something along there. So the earth. Chthon is the standard. Kthonos is the standard word for like earth, like the ground or something like that. So basically, this idea this actually goes back to how Athenians regarded themselves as actually having sprung from the very soil of the Athenian region, so that they were themselves autochthonous. They were from the earth, whereas others who came in from the outside were outsiders. So autochthonous then means basically someone who is local, or someone who's, or in other cases it can mean a natural outgrowth of something. So that's the context of that word. And yes, kids, taking 7 or 8 years of classical Greek is good for you. It's really valuable. Go ahead and I advise doing it as much as you can. Take as much classical Greek as possible. You too can learn your own language. As again, Goethe says, if you don't know foreign languages, you don't know your language. Well, guess what? It's hard to know your language as well as if you take good old-fashioned Latin and Greek.
So what would you say has helped you more, Latin or Greek?
That's a good question. I mean, in terms of thinking about English, I took Latin earlier, so probably that, but both of them have been extremely helpful.
Yeah.
My exposure to more Greek literature and a lot of the concepts and ideas in the Greek literature that I've worked with has been more useful than what I went through in Latin, but the vocabulary benefits of Latin early on were probably greater.
Okay.
Most of the polysyllabic words in English are actually derived from Latin in some way. There are, again, autochthonuses from Greek, but the Latin tends to be a little bit more the bigger words that you don't know. If you've taken Latin makes it easier. But anyway, once again,
Cool.
boys and girls, take your classical languages.
Let's do one more segment that we've been doing recently, and that's what are you reading right now, Jason?
Oh, geez. I'm reading several things at present. I actually have to think about this. I am presently finishing one of the books that I have assigned for my for one of the classes that I'm teaching at the university where I am teaching. So I should be finishing that book here in the next few days. That book is actually by Stephen Prothero. It is called God is Not One. Basically looking at at a number of religious traditions that are significant around the world. I'm also working through another book with my students called Meta Religion by James Lane, which is religion and power in world history. So it's looking at the relationship between religious traditions and various imperial contexts that have helped shape both the religious traditions and how influential those various religious traditions were. And beyond that, I'm working through a few others that I've been poking through at different points for a while. So working through, I'm planning on getting my certified strength and conditioning specialist certification in the near future, and so I'm still poking through some additional resources and stuff on that, and all sorts of other things for other classes that I'm either prepping or or teaching. So that's what I'm working through at present. But I should be, by the time we've done the next podcast, I should be pretty close to done with all the books from the class that I'm teaching now. So because I'm finalizing those lectures, which staying ahead of the students is the first priority there, as I chose those books for a reason, and now I need to make sure that the lectures are coherent with the books.
And then you finished your the book that you were reviewing?
Oh, yeah, I got that review done. Sweet mercy. A nice it was about 600 pages, including the appendices book. Got that review done for the journal that I needed to do it for. And I've basically taken a moratorium. Probably it might be a permanent moratorium on doing scholarly book reviews, because ultimately it's one of those 80-20 things. It takes a significant amount of time, but I get very little out of it in terms of benefit. So I don't have the time for it. So I'll do my own work, and if I'm going to do any sort of book review, it's going to be through this podcast.
Yeah.
So.
Well, cool. I am reading the Walt Disney book by Neil Gabler, and it's really good. It's long, so I'm only getting through 20 to 30 pages a day, but I'm really enjoying it. So it's kind of the start of his life. I mean, the start of his life, and then they just released the Snow White, the first full feature animated film of all time, and that was 1937. And now we're going on to Pinocchio. So very interesting. And before that, I read Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, and that was interesting as well. I enjoyed that. And I'm sure you know this, Jason, but most of the days of our week are named after Norse gods.
Thor's Day is one that everybody should remember.
Yeah, yep. Wednesday from Odin.
Yep.
And so
Odin's Day becomes Wednesday before too long. But yeah, that's why it's spelled W-E-D, right? Instead of you'd expect, when, and most people pronounce it Wednesday, right? But it's not N-D, it's Wednesday, right? Why? Well, because it was originally Odin's Day, and then it just shortens, one of those linguistic things that happens with leading vowel. Basically, Odin's Day becomes Wednesday because we is easier to say than Od, and so then eventually it trims down to wed, and eventually that transitions to wend, which is easier still.
Yeah. All right. Well, to conclude the our book again for this week, Maxims and Reflections. Good book, Jason. I liked what you said about meditating on it. I think that would be cool. I mean, some of these you can even as we were reading them here, it's like, man, you just need to sit with it for a while. You can't. It's hard to even just sit there and listen to the quote. It's something you need to chew on for a while. And one thought I had is maybe a little irrelevant or irreverent, but to put this one by the toilet and have it easily available for.
Well, I mean, what better time for you got some time to meditate?
Yep. So, any
work.
other comments about it?
I think we'll leave it at that. So buy this book, put it on the back of the commode, and then use it as a meditation tool. Spend a couple minutes just thinking through each little statement over time, and after a year or two of doing that, you can go back through and still get some more out of this. So,
well, and if you've got an iPhone, I believe there's a free version of it in iBooks as well. So. Pick that up.
Yeah, so there you go. Well, that'll do it for us today. Now, once again, a reminder before we fully wrap the show that you can follow along with us at booksoftitans.com. You can, of course, interact with us on Twitter or Instagram at Books of Titans. And if you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to this podcast and all of our past podcasts through Apple Podcasts, the Android Marketplace, or your podcast manager of choice. We recommend Overcast. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure to give us 5-star ratings, to tell us, to talk about in the review about what makes this a 5-star podcast. So check in next week. Once again, we've got another book coming up. Actually, we're still determining what the next one is going to be because we're kind of mixing the end books from last year and this year. But I can guarantee you that it's going to be a rousing and stirring discussion. Once again, this is Jason Staples. That is Eric Rostad. This has been the Books of Titans podcast. Keep reading, keep listening, and keep improving.
And keep it real.